Tom Caouette, and Tom's with Homestead Mortgage. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning, John.
How you doing? Okay.
Great.
Well, I've known Tom for a while. I haven't seen you in about 6 or 7 years, although I do my little background checks before I interview and know that you're one of those rare people that actually pulled in $1 million check a couple of years ago.
How'd you know that?
But basically, because I know guys like Becker and Stan, people like that tell me. But anyway, I think it's quite an accomplishment. Let me ask you something. How long have you been in the business, and how did you get started, and where's your market area?
I've been in the business since 1983, and I started by filling in a golf foursome with Bob Becker in the fall of 1982.
And for our listeners out there, he's a big wig for Norwest now.
And he told me about his background being in real estate, managing a real estate office, leaning toward the financing end of the transactions, and evolved into a mortgage loan officer, then a mortgage branch manager, and then the owner of a company.
Mm-hmm.
And I paralleled his career pretty much, so I decided to get out of the real estate business and get into the mortgage business, since numbers are my thing.
Yeah, right. That's interesting, because I started off in the real estate business, too, many years ago. Where's your market area, Tom?
My market area is from Anne Arundel County through Dundalk to north of Bel Air.
And for those listeners that live out in Siberia someplace, where exactly is that? I know, but...
That's in Maryland. From Annapolis, Maryland, to about 20 miles north of Baltimore on Route 95.
Wow, that's a long territory going up that way. Annapolis to north of, what is that, about a 50-mile territory? Up and down?
Yes, it's probably got about a 50-mile radius. That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
And I just work on referrals, so I go wherever the calls come from.
Mm-hmm. When you first got in the business, were you actively soliciting realtors? Is that where you first started, or did you go down some other avenue like new homes?
I had an advantage because, having managed in the real estate business and sold in the real estate business for 10 years, I knew all the key players. So when I went into the mortgage business, I'm a little bit of a shy type of a person, but I knew somebody in every office. So I was able to visit the offices, and I would visit my main accounts 2 and 3 times a day as the personnel in the office change over from morning to lunch to evening. And I was just in their face so much, so often, and was so persistent that they just had to deal with me.
You raised an interesting issue right away, so we may as well get into it, and that is the issue of getting face time and being persistent. I wondered if you kind of elaborate on the importance of it for our listeners out there. Well,
the main thing that, back in those days, things are different today, but back in those days, what I tried to do, because I was very sensitive to the fact that mortgage lenders used to bother me when I was a real estate agent and or manager. So when I went out on the street, I kept that in mind, and I just would catch their eye. If they looked at me and they had something that they wanted me to talk about, they would invite me to their desk. I never just stopped and started chatting and wasting their time. But they saw me, and I would lay my card on their desk while they were talking on the telephone. I wouldn't sit there and listen to them. I would just breeze through. But I was available in that office so many times a day, so many times a week, and on the weekends, that if they were talking about a transaction, there was a pretty good chance that I would be there. And if they invited me in, then I would have a conversation with them. And once you have a conversation and you start helping them with the pre-qual, the chances are pretty good that you're going to get the transaction. I find that kind of interesting if you want to know the truth. And the reason is I've done many interviews where people talk about getting FaceTime, but no one has quite explained it like you just did, in the sense of combining being there and being there all the time without really literally being obnoxious about it. Because I think a lot of loan officers today, and you can agree or disagree with me, but I think a lot of loan officers today do not know how to deal with realtors today. It's a lot harder. But there is a point, and you and I have been realtors before, where we can look at it from the other side, where realtors can get really kind of irritated with loan officers to a point where they really don't want to deal with them if they don't observe certain rules of courtesy. Well, a lot of new people in the mortgage business today are pretty highly educated. They're young, motivated. They've got their 2- and 3-piece suits on. But they have no idea where these realtors are coming from. And they think that the realtors the loan officers think that they're earning the commission for the realtors, which couldn't be further from the truth. The realtor's job today is so tough, and if you haven't been there, you just don't appreciate it. Yes, we do a lot of work for them in that we get them the mortgage and finishes it off and takes it to the table. But they do all the work. When they introduce us to the buyer, we're either pre-qualifying them, which takes 15 or 20 minutes with computers, or we're sitting down for a 30-minute application. And then if we turn it over to our processors, I mean, it settles a month later. So for young loan officers to sit back and say, well, if it wasn't for us, this transaction never would have gone. I mean, they don't know how many hours that realtor has spent, first of all, finding the buyers, showing them 1,000 houses, taking them to lunch, living with all their problems, and before they finally get them under contract. So they do, in my opinion, they do all the work, and we're just there to finish it up, help them, and you know, the loan process, if somebody's qualified, is not a difficult thing. You lock them into a fair rate, and you minimize the problems, and you get to the settlement table.
When you say that, it immediately brings to mind the fact that of something that's tangential to what you just said, and that is that when a realtor puts a deal down, they may make $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, whatever. When a loan officer does, he may make $400, $500, $600, $700, whatever. And there's a disconnect there in the pricing, and that kind of reverses itself, and in the sense that if a realtor brings you, the loan officer, a deal, and you screw that deal up, you're losing $500, but that realtor's losing $3,000 or $4,000. It's much more serious. That's correct.
Well, I have a very simple philosophy when it comes to that. I absolutely never take a loan application without having done my due diligence. Not only do I run the credit report, but I insist upon seeing a pay stub or a bank statement, or I have enough conversation with the people to know that what they're telling me is true. And then I issue my commitment letter. If I issue a commitment letter, pre-commitment letter, whatever you want to call it, subject to appraisal only, those folks will get a loan. And to do it any other way, or to risk telling somebody that they can get a loan and let the realtor go through the whole process of all the work, and then at the end hold them up because you didn't do your due diligence, is unforgivable. And you just can't get away with that in today's marketplace.
Yeah, what if you expound on it? I happen to know your methodology is a little bit different than a lot of loan officers out there, in that you are very big on the upfront process of qualifying people and taking care of everything up front, so there's no surprises. I wonder if you get into exactly what you do.
I'd say half of my loan applications, I meet the folks in a pre-interview for 20 minutes to a half an hour, usually in their homes. When the realtor gets a call from a referral, there are a whole lot of questions that the buyers have today, and I'm not real comfortable sitting down on the telephone, being one other phone call that they could have found on the internet or God knows where, and try to establish some rapport with them. It's much, much easier. Get some directions, be at their house at 6 or 6:30, whatever's convenient for them, sit down with them for 20 minutes, tell them the facts of life, and they grow comfortable with you. They know exactly what they're doing, how much money they're going to take to do the transaction. You hand them the letter telling that they're pre-approved. And then the issue of price, when the final transaction is struck within a week, 2 weeks, or a month, is not the issue. I don't gouge people, but I charge people a fair price, and I make a decent commission on every loan. And price is not the issue if I've done my due diligence. If somebody calls me out of the blue and is just price shopping, they're probably talking to the wrong lender, because I probably won't wind up doing their transaction.
When you talk about doing pre-qual, are you big on pre-approvals or pre-quals in the old sense?
It's actually a pre-approval. It's not a pre-qual in the old sense. It's a pre-approval.
Okay.
It's subject to appraisal only. But if I go to somebody's house, prior to going to their house, of course I pull a credit report. About once every 6 or 7 months, I'll have a nervous breakdown in my brain and go to somebody's house without pulling the credit report, and come back the next morning and find out that I was wasting my time.
Mm-hmm.
Because they sounded so good on the telephone, I thought, oh, well, I just don't need to pull the credit report on these folks, which is always a mistake. Always a mistake.
Are you doing the 3 database merge and purge type? I mean,
exactly. And if, in fact, it's a close credit score, like around 600, for instance, or well, things are changing so much today that Fannie will do, Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3 loans at a slightly higher rate. But if I pull the credit report and I'm not positive, I can't issue a commitment that I'm positive about, then I'll get a credit letter. I'll get confirmation of assets, whatever it takes to build the file up, and then I'll submit it to my underwriting department. If I can't run it through the computer and get an approval through DU, I'll submit it to my underwriting department before these folks have even gone out in the street to look at house one. And I'll make sure that I do have an approval for them, tell them what kind of an approval, what kind of rate, and then they can go out and buy with a clear conscience because they know it's not an exercise in futility.
And I think the realtor appreciates that too, because you have a deal in hand for them. That makes a big difference.
It takes the guesswork out of it. There is no guesswork.
Right, exactly.
It makes the realtor do what the realtor is supposed to do, know their inventory, and negotiate a contract.
Mm-hmm. You had said something a little bit earlier I want to kind of get into, and that is one of your first statements was the fact that the business does not exist the way it did back in 1983, and it's different for loan officers out there today. What do you mean by that?
Okay, what I mean is that you used to be able to walk into any office. I started in Anne Arundel County, and I would call on 4 or 5 offices. And I could walk into any office, go anywhere I wanted in the office, and I was welcomed by the manager, by all the realtors. I could talk to them if I wanted to, or I could leave. Today, with realtors tied into their own mortgage companies, and with the armed guards that they practically have at the front door, they won't let you buy you buy the front desk. They won't let you in. So you need to have a contact in the office to get invited back to the back room where the big hitters are, in order to be able to talk to them. So it's quite a different scenario from what we but there's still ways of getting in there.
And how about some of those ways for our listeners out there?
Well, the best thing that you can do is you have to associate with a hitter in an office. Once you associate with one hitter in the office, you can have that person, and you do good for them, and they trust you, and they know that you're going to do good work for them. What I do is just ask them to refer me to one other person in the office. Tell that person how good I am. And in a month later, I ask that person, introduce me to one more in the office. And before you know it, I'm doing business with the 5 or 6 top people in the office, and that's all I want.
So you're going right to what you and I would call a center of influence. In other words, you're not going right into a rookie realtor. You're going right in for the top people.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Now, in order to get to that top person, you might have to email them, you might have to fax them, you might have to call them out of the blue. They might turn you down for 4 lunches, but if they go with you once, if they turn you down 4 times out of 5, you've won. And you've got an opportunity to sit down with them, tell them what you will do, your experience level, how good your products are, the whole 9 yards. You get a chance to sell yourself. You can't sell yourself if you're walking into a front desk and throwing a bunch of flyers on the desk. It's a complete waste of time.
What about, you said something else, too, that everybody always sparks my interest, and I think everybody out there, and that is the issue of companies that have their own internal mortgage offices today. And I just wondered if you would go over how you personally feel about it and how you deal with it.
Well, personally, I think it's a violation of RESPA, and I think one of these days they're going to catch on to that. They're tying in managers' pay plans to the number of loans that the associates do, that the real estate associates do, and if not an absolute violation of the law, it's certainly a violation of the spirit of the law. And what they wind up getting for loan officers in these companies many times are people that are not as strong as I am, or some of the best loan officers in the area. They don't have the experience. They're on reduced pay plans. The companies, they're not in it. I mean, they don't know how to anybody can take a 5% down, tremendous income, great credit scores, and money in the bank. But that might be 1/4 of the transactions we face today. The other 3/4, you have to sit down and you've got to help them work their way through the transaction. And most of these people that work for these companies, when they get good, they leave those companies. They go out on their own. So you're dealing with inexperienced people.
It's a constant turnover of inexperienced people.
It's like Countrywide. the branch manages countrywide.
Right, we gotta stop here. We try and keep off stuff like that.
Okay, can't talk.
Yeah, just stuff that's gets to the heart of a company or something that's proprietary. It's just kind of a general rule. But I understand your point in that. And another problem is that I'd like for you to address that's directly related to what you just mentioned is the fact that you're now getting managers that favor that company, but they're also making it very hard for others to get into the office.
Well, the reason that managers are favoring the in-house lender is because their pay plan is directly tied to how many loans that in-house lender does with their office. Which in my humble opinion is an absolute violation of the spirit of the law of RESPA. And eventually, one of these days, somebody's going to get smart. Some congressman is going to find that out, and they're going to pass a law, and this is going to be a problem for them, because it certainly is not giving the borrower all the options that are available to it when it's all captured under one roof. I mean,
well, if they're vulnerable in anything, that's where it is what you and I might call steering, where the customer does not have the opportunity to see the best rate that's out there. But getting back to loan officers today that are out there, first off, let me just ask you something. In terms of, because you've been around a while, and I'm sure the dynamics have changed a bit, what percentage of your business is coming directly from realtors today versus the referrals that you're getting? And then I want to get back on realtors.
It probably is 50% from directly from realtors and 50% from referrals, but it all depends on what kind of market you're in. Mm-hmm. When you're in a refi market, it could be as high as 75% referrals and 25% realtors.
Yeah, and we're not in a refi market right now, or at least certainly nothing that's big. So you still get out there and still have to do the hustle with the realtors, and
it's in a different way. I don't visit offices. I send them correspondence. I talk to them on the telephone. And I'm available to them 24/7. With cell phones, which keeps ringing as we're speaking.
Yeah, that's sure. They're very normal in my interviews. Trust me.
So you have to be available 24/7 to answer their questions. I've got my little laptop computer. I can pull a credit report. I encourage. We're being redundant here a little bit, but I encourage every one of even my top realtors, to not take step one with anyone until they let me run the initial credit report. And find out something about income and assets.
Is that like your entree into them?
My entree into them is, don't waste your time. Let me help you. Spend your time with qualified people. I mean, I know it's very, very basic. This isn't rocket science, but you'd be surprised how many agents are so anxious if somebody comes knocking on their door to run around with them before they do their due diligence. Mm-hmm. And if they work with me, I don't allow them to do that.
But don't you think there's some value added here for those loan officers that are listening throughout the country right now as we speak? That one of the ways to create that kind of relationship is to perform a service. The service being, of course, qualifying these people right up from the get-go. I think there's a lot of loan officers out there that kind of have it what I would call ass backwards, where they're out there visiting and waiting for the calls to come in, and then just reacting to the realtor rather than. Let me ask you something, Tom. Do you take loan apps at realtors' offices, or do you do it at the home always? What kind of methodology do you use?
Well, I like to take it in the realtor's office, obviously, because I see other realtors there.
Okay.
That's my method of visiting these days, is by showing up and either picking up appraisals or dropping off. Today with faxes, you can do everything by fax, but it's an excuse to be there. You have a real reason to be there. You're not bothering people. But many of my really good realtors trust me implicitly. They don't have to be there, so I do wind up going to people's house maybe half of the time and taking the loan application right in there. And people like that. They're in their home, they put their kids to bed or whatever, and I show up at 7 or 7:30 at night and sit down, and 30 minutes later it's done.
Do you take apps in your office at all?
Only during a big refi surge. Very, very seldom do I have people come. I believe in, it's one of the few things that we can do as far as service is concerned, and that's be at their disposal at their time. I mean, people are busy today. I never have anybody miss any work. I work Monday through Thursday evenings. I take phone calls all weekend, but I try to schedule my appointments, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, because I'm usually doing something over the weekends.
Mm-hmm. What do you do on weekends as far as your professional duties? Do you try and take them?
Just be available.
Be available.
I'm just available because I manage my branch, and my loan officers have questions and things come up, and they need to get back with quick answers to their own realtors. But I also am available, and if I have to run into the office, or if I have to go meet some folks on Saturday or Sunday, if one of my top 10 realtors asks me to do that, I'll absolutely do it in a heartbeat.
Mm-hmm. But the thing is, you're a very heavy volume producer, and yet you also run an office, and so it really raises the issue. How do you manage your time properly? Do you have a methodology that you try and stick to?
Oh, to be honest with you, unless we're in a completely huge bull market where I'm doing 5 to 10 a day, it's absolutely not a problem at all. I mean,
I know you're an early riser, for example. You start off your business day very early.
Well, and people, there are certain times of the day when the realtors are going to need you most. It's either 8 to 10 in the morning or 5 to 7 at night, and you just have to plan. If you're going to exercise or do some other things, try to do it around those time frames, so that when they call you, they can get you immediately. One of the problems with no matter how good a rapport you have with anybody, if they cannot reach you and you don't get back to them within a very short time frame, there's always somebody else out there. And if you give somebody else the opportunity to talk to your longtime realtor, you never know when something would blossom, and away they go. So I don't want them talking to anybody but me.
Mm-hmm. I talked to Rod Flowers, who you probably know, works down in Salisbury for SunTrust, and does probably $70-80 million a year. And he has that kind of aggressiveness in him too, where he immediately answers the phone. He doesn't want anybody talking to any competition under any kind of circumstances. And I think that's, in this kind of environment, that's exactly the way you have to act as a loan officer today. The idea, the concept of getting back to somebody in a couple hours when they're trying to get hold of you is just anathema.
No, you cannot do that. What you have to do is be able to delegate. The paperwork of gathering the papers and putting the stuff in the computer, and there's a lot of functions like that I absolutely don't do at all. But what I do best is use my experience and my knowledge and talk to people. And, if I was talking to somebody every 5 minutes all day long, there wouldn't be a warehouse big enough to hold all the money. So there's really not a time problem. As long as you don't have to do all the work, all the follow-up work yourself. And I delegate very well. I have very good staff.
Mm-hmm. Which kind of leads me into an area I want to talk about. How do you manage, since you've been in business so long, do you have a database? Do you use ACT? How do you manage everything? You mentioned you had a laptop computer.
Yes, I have a laptop computer that keeps track of all the pre-quals, keeps track of all my old customers. We have a follow-up system where we send them 5 or 6 pieces of correspondence a year just to let them know where we are and what's happening. It's all done. It's an automated system, so it's not something that I have to sit down and do myself.
Do you find you get a lot of deals doing that?
Well, people. I have an odd name with 4 vowels in it. So.
You really, for our people out there, I know how to spell your name. It's Caouette, right?
That's correct. So that helps, having an odd name, and that people remember that crazy name.
Mm-hmm.
But you've got to have it out in front of them, once, twice, 3 times a year, or, it's just like anything else, out of sight, out of mind.
Well, I think when it comes to your former clients out there, that's exactly right. And if you want to build up a database, you have to do the things where they're constantly thinking of you. I've had interviews where people talk about simple things like sending cards that are magnets that go on refrigerator doors just to keep their name in front of people. And as a matter of fact, it brings in an incredible amount of business.
Well, as you were speaking, John, I thought of one other thing that I do that I know I've heard several new people, because I've had new people working for me, and I know some other companies. that they think is absolutely a waste of time. And it's called being able to do something for somebody without expecting anything in instant return. When people have circumstances where they have relatives or they have transactions that are very small and there's very little commission involved, but they need help. I don't want to call it pro bono because I'll probably get a $200 or $300 check on some of these things, but I'll put as much time into helping people with their small transactions as I do with their $500,000 transactions, because that's the thing that leads to loyalty from people and tons of referrals. I mean, you know, when you're the person that's going to be there to help them, no matter what the circumstance, if it's got to do with real estate and a loan, they're going to call you. And if I don't have the product that the folks need, I'll find it for them and I'll tell them where to go. And I'll do the same thing for my realtors. I mean, I don't have every loan for every transaction that's done.
Mm-hmm.
But if they call me first and I can send them in the direction of getting the loan, what is it going to do? It's going to make them call me first, and that's what I want them to do.
Yeah, it's nothing more than building up that relationship, and relationships are what this business is all about.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you something about, you had said something earlier about pricing, and I don't often ask the question, but enough. I wondered if you discussed the importance for especially the new loan officers out there that are listening to this, of pricing and where that kind of fits on your schedule, and whether you consider pricing important, or how do you deal with it?
I think if you give away your price to try to get your foot in the door, you're wasting your time, because once a transaction is struck and done, nobody remembers whether you got a half a point or a point in the transaction or what the rate was. You've wound up doing all the work, and you think that you've made an association with somebody, but the people that are shopping for price on every transaction are never going to be any different. They're going to be the same all the time. And that's not the kind of person that you want to deal with. You want to deal with somebody that's going to appreciate your professionalism, your knowledge, and the fact that you're going to get the transaction to the table with the least amount of problems. And in order to do that, you have to get a fair price on your product. So price is not an issue. I don't discuss price with anybody on any transactions. I range my quotes. Today, for instance, we're talking about somewhere between 8 and 8.5%, whether we have an origination fee or a discount point or two in the transaction. That's what I say.
I like that. I like that a lot.
And to try to pin yourself down to a price, you can't do that anyway, because it's going to take 1 or 2 or 3 days for the transaction to come together, and the price could be a point better or a point worse. So a quote at any given time, unless it's for a finished transaction and somebody's calling you, just price shopping, is a waste of time. And if they're going to price shop, and that's all they're going to do, then they shouldn't be talking to me, because they don't need me. They need the internet or somebody that's giving away product.
What do you think about the internet today? And by that, I rather actually want to be quite specific. I'm talking about the internet mortgage companies, and do they represent a threat? How do you feel about them? They're obviously going to get some business, but they're certainly not going to.
They're going to get the real clean people that are going to spend, the amount of time that it takes to try to filter through whatever those offers are out there, as to whether they're legitimate or illegitimate, and what their fees are or not, the internet. Some of the people on the internet have things like permanent buy down. They'll tell you that they don't charge any points, but they'll have a 2.5% permanent buy down fee. I mean, you can't. No business can give away their product and stay in business. So if the price is too good to be true, it's because it is too good to be true, and there are built-in fees that they're making up for their lack of what they call quote unquote points. And a lot of people are, an individual who buys a house once in 10 years doesn't have the experience to know that. But if they call you and they're talking to you and they're telling you that they're going to go check the internet, it's not difficult to tell them to watch out for all the other parameters. And then the big thing today is good faith estimates. Everybody wants you to fax them a good faith estimate. Well, unless people are math majors from Wharton Business School, they're going to get so confused with the 4 or 5 good faith estimates that come their way, because there's so many different names for so many different fees. What people have to do, this is my firm belief, is to trust somebody. And in order for them to trust me, they can't get it from talking to me on the telephone or me faxing them a good faith estimate. I ask them for 15 or 20 minutes of their time. We'll talk. I'll make my presentation. If they don't want to do business with me, we'll shake hands, no hard feelings, and I'll be on my way. If they're going to try to do it electronically, then beware of what you're going to run into. And I think a lot of people are leery of if a deal looks too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true.
It's a minute. You've articulated what some others have said. I said it because this is not the first time I've asked the question. And for the loan officers out there, I think the feeling that comes across, and maybe the 15 or 20 times that I've asked this question of top producers, is exactly what you hit, that these internet companies, they still have to get that loan through and collect everything. They have to do that back office stuff, and there is no way to beat that deal. And so what they're doing is you correctly ascertain, they're coming out with really good pricing that looks wonderful, but when you start looking at their junk fees and the stuff behind it, they're getting it all back with the other hand. And a lot of loan officers I know, they will absolutely insist that they get from these internet companies, they'll send them a good faith and say, these are the categories to watch out. Now you go get one, and they get that client back again, because when they get that list of fees, they're just, really junked up.
That's right.
I don't think, just speaking for myself, I think the internet mortgage companies will survive. I think they'll prosper to some degree. But most people that I've talked to really don't feel that they're going to end up with more than maybe 15% of the business max. It gets back to the fact that if, as I've said many times before, if an appraisal goes bad, who are you going to call in Nebraska?
That's right. Well, there's so many issues. I mean, yes, mortgages have gotten simpler to get. I mean, there's a lot of things that have made the process a lot more simple than it used to be, but there are still issues that have to be solved. I mean, I'd say 3 out of 4 transactions still require some expertise. And it's like you say, if you're dealing with somebody over the telephone or an internet company or somebody where there's no hands-on, I mean, you're in trouble. Mm-hmm. And I think most people appreciate that and recognize that fact.
Right. Let's jump off in an entirely new direction, because you've been around such a long time. I have to believe that over the years that you've developed areas that you get business that are what I call outside the box, like CPAs and closing attorneys or whatever. And I wonder if maybe you would discuss that a little bit for the people out there, the opportunities that are available outside of the realtor box.
Well, the 2 best areas that I know of are in every law firm, there's a real estate attorney. And if you get to know the real estate attorney, that's the person in the law firm that gets all the questions regarding real estate, whether it's a mortgage or a refinance or whatever kind of problems that they need a lender's expertise. I have 3 or 4 of those and from big firms in Baltimore. Whenever they get a call, they call me. So they're a natural, really good referral service. The second, you mentioned CPAs. I have an accountant that probably has 500 to 1,000 different people in the state of Maryland that he does business with, and they're always in need of a loan for one thing or another. And he comes with me. We go to the people's house, and he's like a god to these people. He's done their taxes for how many years, advised them financially. He's got instant credibility with all these people, and I shouldn't say instant credibility. He's got credibility built from years of service, but I have instant credibility when he introduces me. Mm-hmm. So I sit down, do what I have to do, and there's no questions asked about anything. We do what we're supposed to do. We get the loan done for them. We don't gouge people, but we make a reasonable profit. But again, it's back to the price thing that you asked me about before. Price is not the issue. I'm there to perform a service, and having the CPA right there with you is awesome. I don't know how many.
It really is. This is the first time I've heard. This is absolutely in my 25 years in the business, actually, that I have ever heard of a CPA that is willing to actually go to someone's house on that. I mean, that's an incredibly high level of service.
Well, and this guy's got more referrals than you can believe. His schedule is full 7 days a week, 365 days out of the year. He's busy all the time, and every place he goes, not every appointment, but probably 1 out of 10 appointments, somebody needs a loan. And when that's the case, I'm with him.
That's amazing. Do you think there's a lot of business to be had in these areas, and that loan officers in general overlook them?
Well, going back to what we talked about earlier, the majority of the business comes from the realtors, and you can get completely tied up with trying to entertain them and spend all your time, trying to associate with them. And yes, they're a big part of it, but you can't not pay attention to these other areas, because that business, my lawyer business and my CPA business, is the best. It's a referral. It's an instant referral, is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I have instant credibility. When a real estate attorney recommends you, do you think you have to go in and make a presentation or do anything? You're the man. And it's the same thing with the accountant.
Whereas with a realtor, because they, legally have to give, not legally, but they're according to the realtor code, they have to give 3 names out. You don't always you have some credibility.
Yes, some.
But you don't have it all. It's like every time you have to do your new deal and do your little dance and romance.
That's correct.
But I like that concept that you're talking about. You're right. I haven't really given a lot of thought other than what we're talking about right now, that with people like CPAs and settlement attorneys and professionals like that, you really do have instant credibility going in from the get-go.
That's right.
Which would reflect also in pricing.
That's correct.
You're not going to get into pricing issues with these people where they're going to try and, whack you for an extra quarter point or something like that, which realtors are more than happy to do, as you know, today.
That's correct.
Do you find a lot of realtors out there really price shop a lot? I mean, are they really,
You're leading me to one other point that I didn't want to forget to tell you. I have fired 6 realtors. I've been in the business since 1983, so that's not too many in 18 years.
I like it, though. Go ahead to talk.
But they were making their transactions. They were if we were in an 8.5 market, they were, one in particular would be selling 8 1/4, always coming out of my pocket. And she worked me to death and wouldn't allow me to make any money. And I worked with her for about a year, did a lot of transactions with her, made very little return on my investment. And I finally decided to tell her that enough's enough. Go find somebody else. You're done. What do you mean? You're firing me? Yes, I'm firing you. You're not dealing with me anymore. And that's to your chagrin. And that was it. And I did that. I've done that at least 6 times.
Yeah, and don't you think loan officers ought to do it as maybe not as standard practice, but it's the same thing as you wouldn't ask a doctor to cut his fee or to shop a doctor by asking him what they charge per hour, or a dentist. You're looking for the best help that you can get.
My advice to every realtor is, when you get into a transaction and you get down to the bottom line, every once in a while, everybody has to give a little. And if I'm your lender, I'll be happy to participate. But it's got to be very, very rare, because you shouldn't be giving up your commission, and you shouldn't be expecting me to be giving mine up. But if it's a every other transaction, or that's how you're making your transactions work, by giving away my money, that's not going to work either. And you have to give everybody a chance. You have to, you might run into your first couple of transactions with somebody might be that kind of a scenario. But if it's going to continue, you've got to be very upfront and say, hey, I'm not here. I'm here to help you. So you can make your money and I can make mine, but I'm not going to be working for nothing. And if it persists, then you're much better off getting away from them, because not only are you working for nothing, but you're destroying your attitude. Because when you work hard, you want to get some recompense for it.
Absolutely. When I used to have that problem, I used to go right in a realtor's face and say, well, I'll tell you what, why don't we work it this way? I'll cut this time, and the next time, why don't you just cut your commission the next time? And then, of course, you just look at the horror on their face, where they would never contemplate cutting their commission, and that usually kind of took care of the problem right away. How many realtors are you dealing with now? You seem to indicate you have a very large territory.
Large territory, but very few people. And I only deal with the top professionals, maybe 10 to 12.
Mm-hmm. And do you recommend that people do that? I mean, is that obviously it works for you, but why does that work for you?
Well, let's say you want to try to service 20 or 30 people, it just becomes very, very difficult. You talked about the time situation before. You'd have to be you'd have to be much more dedicated than I am at my age. You'd have to work 7 days a week, and you'd have to have a lot more support staff, and you'd have people pulling from you from all directions. the kind of service I want to give somebody limits me to the number of people that I can do business with. I mean, I want to give first-class service no matter when they want it. And I, if I have 10 or 12 people that are doing $50 million a year in transactions, coupled with my referrals from my old customers, my CPAs, and my real estate attorneys, I mean, that's enough. And that's just a personal opinion.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think once again it gets back to going into these, what other people have. This is not my word. Centers of influence, where you're trying to deal ultimately to get to those people that are not doing, 2 or 3 or 4 deals a year, and maybe you'll get them all, but the trouble you're going to go through. Just holding their hands and everything, it isn't worth it. It's better to go after the active realtors, develop that intense relationship that you've described, and have 10 or 12 people that you're giving good service to all the time.
That's correct. I mean, somebody else may be very happy doing 30, 40, or 50 people, and they might be doing a whole lot more transactions and making a whole lot more money, but I'm happy with the way I do things.
Mm-hmm. What do you do for your realtors? And by that I mean, do you shower them with gifts, take them to ball games, have personal relationships? How do you deal with those 12 or 15 people?
I have baseball tickets. I send out things, small things at Easter, at Christmas. I bring them a nice basket of fruit.
Mm-hmm.
And I personally talk to them at least every other day on the telephone. If I can't see them face to face, I want to talk to them. So it becomes a very personal relationship.
But don't you think really that's what this business about is forming those kind of personal relationships?
That's correct. I mean, there's a lot of different ways of doing it, but that's the way I like to do it.
Right, exactly. Well, I think we're going to end this on that high point, and I want to thank you very much for talking to us. I know how busy you are. You think it's unusual hearing a little beeper and phone ringing in the background. I did an interview with somebody at I don't know, I think it was 6 in the morning up in the Buffalo area, and his beeper went off 7 separate times within a 40-minute period. So. That's just the way the business is, and so I'm sure you're going to have a pretty busy day. So thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us, Tom, and I thought you had a lot of good points, and thanks again. Best of luck to you.
You're welcome.